It began with a silence that felt unnatural, a silence too sharp, too sudden, like the moment right before a storm breaks open the sky. That night, millions tuned in expecting nothing more than another political briefing, a dull, predictable statement from a man people had already grown tired of listening to. But instead, they witnessed something no broadcast in the country had ever captured before, a confession so raw, so catastrophic, that even the cameras seemed to hesitate before continuing to film. Steve Marlowe arrived at the government press hall 10 minutes before the briefing. Not early, not late, exactly on time, as he always did. He didn't expect anything unusual, just another evening on the job. He walked past metal detectors, past the board security staff, past a junior reporter yawning into her coffee. But even then, there was something odd in the air. Not danger, not fear, something else. Anticipation. It clung to the walls, to the lights, to the faces of the staff members who avoided eye contact as they hurried down the corridor. Steve slowed his pace. Something was off. Subtly, quietly, but unmistakably off. He pressed his badge at the final checkpoint and entered the hall. The room was already filling up. Cameras clicked, microphones glowed red. Everyone waited. The politician, a man famous for being painfully predictable, was nowhere to be seen. Strange. He was never late. Steve set up his notes, adjusted his mic, straightened the papers on his lap. Routine motions, movements of habit. But then he felt it. A sudden shift in the atmosphere, like a heavy curtain being pulled across a window. The room dimmed. Not literally, emotionally, psychologically. He wasn't alone in noticing it. Several reporters exchanged uneasy glances. 2 minutes later, the side door opened. The politician entered, or rather, a man who looked like the politician. His posture was the same. His suit, perfectly pressed. His steps measured. But his face looked hollow, drained, as if someone had scooped out his confidence and left a fragile, trembling shell behind. He approached the podium, gripped its edges so tightly his knuckles turned white, and stared at the sea of reporters as though he were standing before an execution squad. Steve leaned forward. Something terrible was about to happen. The politician inhaled sharply, as if preparing for a dive into freezing, deadly water. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked on the first word, not from emotion, from exhaustion. "It's time I tell the truth," he said. Silence. He looked directly into the cameras. "For the last 7 years I have not been making my own decisions." A ripple of confusion spread across the room. Reporters glanced at one another. Some frowned. A few laughed quietly, thinking this was a strange attempt at humor. But Steve didn't laugh. He saw something in the politician's eyes that others didn't. Fear. Real fear. The kind of fear that only appears when a man knows he won't live long after speaking the truth. The politician continued. "There are people, forces, groups, that operate outside the public eye. They decide policies. They decide outcomes. They decide us." He swallowed hard. "I was approached, pressured, threatened, controlled. My family." He stopped, voice breaking. Cameras zoomed in. Security guards shifted uneasily. The room felt tighter, as though the walls were closing in. "Everything I've done in the last 7 years, every vote, every signature, every statement, was dictated to me." A collective gasp, disbelief, shock. Steve felt cold sweat on his hands. Then, the politician's voice dropped to a whisper. "And if I don't say this now, I never will." He leaned in. "I'm not the first, and I won't be the last." And then the lights flickered. The microphone cut out for a second. Static buzzed through the speakers. Someone shouted for technicians. A guard rushed toward the stage. The politician stepped back from the podium and collapsed. The room erupted. Chaos, screams, security flooding the stage, medical staff pushing through the crowd, reporters trying to film from every angle. Steve tried to move closer, but a guard blocked him with an outstretched arm. "Step back! What happened to him?" Steve shouted. No answer. Another guard leaned down over the politician's body, then whispered something urgently to a man in a black suit who had appeared out of nowhere. Within seconds, the politician was carried out of the room on a stretcher, unconscious or dead. Steve couldn't tell, but he knew one thing. The confession wasn't over. because just before the politician fell, right after the lights flickered, he looked directly at Steve. Directly, not at the crowd, not at the cameras, at Steve, and mouthed a single word, a single chilling word: "Run!" Within minutes, the press conference was cut from live broadcast. Networks replaced the feed with generic emergency graphics. Officials claimed a medical emergency. Staff members were ushered out, their devices taken for security checks. But Steve couldn't stop shaking. The politician looked at him as if he knew Steve would be the one to uncover the rest. And maybe he was right. Because when Steve finally stepped outside into the cold night air, he found something inside his coat pocket. Something that wasn't there before. An envelope, unmarked, sealed, his name written on it in a hurried, trembling hand. Steve looked around. No one stood near him. No one had approached him. But someone had slipped the envelope inside his coat during the chaos. He opened it. Inside was one sentence, written shakily, desperately. If you're reading this, they already know. From the moment Steve and the cameraman Edgar left the press center, they both felt the same thing. Something was wrong. And yet, as they drove through the night city, much of what happened still seemed like a coincidence. A man disappeared. A black van took him away. Security camera footage was erased. These things happen, don't they? But with every passing minute, that explanation became less and less believable. Edgar, nervously adjusting the lens of his camera, finally exhaled. "Steve, what if? We weren't supposed to see that?" Steve took his eyes off the road. "I think, Edgar, we saw exactly what they wanted to hide." The sentence hung in the air like fog that refused to clear. When they returned to the newsroom, Steve received an unexpected call. A number with no caller ID, as if it didn't come from a phone at all, but from nowhere. He answered. "Stephen Hammer," a dry, precise voice said. "You were at Mr. Kelton's press conference today." Steve tensed. "And who are you?" The silence that followed was too long, too deliberate. "Your job is to ask questions," the voice said. "Ours is to give answers, but not today. Today I only want to give you advice. Do not return to what you saw. Forget this evening, and keep living your quiet life." A chill ran down Steve's spine. "And if I don't forget?" The pause this time was even longer. "Then someone else will make sure you do." The line went dead. Edgar walked over. "Who was that?" Steve shook his head. "Someone who really doesn't want us to keep digging." The next morning, Steve made a decision. If the truth was truly this dangerous, then it mattered even more. He had to find who orchestrated the disappearance. Someone inside Kelton's inner circle. Someone who knew what was happening behind the scenes. He started with Kelton's assistant, Michael Rowell, a man who always stayed out of sight. No social media, no public photos, no digital footprint. It was as if he only existed when someone allowed him to. Steve dialed the number he had obtained from a colleague. Long beeps. 1, 2, 3. Then, a click. "Who gave you this number?" a sharp voice asked. "I need to speak to Michael Rowell. He's unavailable." "Then tell him—" Steve hesitated. "Tell him, the journalist who attended yesterday's press conference wants to clarify something." Silence. "You were warned," the voice said, and hung up. But that same evening, Steve received a text message. "North Hill Mall parking lot, 10:40 p.m. Come alone." It was insane. This was exactly how people walked into traps. But Steve understood. If he wanted answers, he had to risk it. He arrived early. The rooftop of the parking lot was nearly empty. A few scattered cars, almost no people. Wind whistled between concrete pillars, carrying cold dust. At 10:41 p.m., headlights appeared in the distance. A sedan approached slowly. The window rolled down, and Steve recognized the face. It was not Rowell. It was someone he had seen only briefly, in a photo taken outside Kelton's headquarters. A man with no name. "Get in," the man said. Steve hesitated, then opened the door. The lock engaged automatically. "Don't worry," the man said. "If I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it yesterday." He spoke calmly, too calmly. "Then who are you?" Steve asked. The man stared straight ahead. "I'm someone who knows why Kelton disappeared, and you need to know it too." Steve's heart pounded. "Speak." For a brief moment, the man turned toward him, and Steve saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, not hostility, fear. Kelton wasn't supposed to reveal what he revealed, the man said. He spoke too soon. It was a mistake. And mistakes, in our world, are rarely paid for with words. Steve leaned in. Is Kelton alive? The man nodded slowly. Yes, but not for long, unless you do exactly what I tell you. The man reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a small flash drive, and placed it on the dashboard. This contains everything we have on Kelton, his contacts, his draft disclosures, and the people who vanished before him. Steve swallowed. You want me to expose all of this? The world must know, but not all at once, and not immediately. You were given this because you're the only journalist who doesn't belong to anyone. You aren't bought. You aren't controlled. Not yet. Steve took the flash drive. Why help me? The man turned away. Because I'm tired of watching people treated like assets, and because the next one on the list is me. He started the engine. Go, and don't look back. Steve stepped out, and the sedan disappeared into the night. Sitting behind the wheel of his own car, he finally understood something. He was now part of something much bigger than a press conference. Back at his apartment, Steve placed the flash drive in front of him like it was something alive. He didn't plug it in. Not yet. He needed to think. Everything he'd seen, everything he'd heard. This wasn't journalism anymore. This was survival. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. What could be so dangerous that an entire security team erased footage, abducted a politician, and threatened anyone who asked questions? Finally, he inserted the flash drive into his laptop. A folder appeared instantly. No encryption, no passwords, just a single file. Rooms. He clicked it. Inside was a list. Dozens of names. People from politics, finance, tech. Some he recognized. Public figures. Others were complete unknowns. Next to every name was a timestamp, a location, and then a status. Returned. Reassigned. Withdrawn. Terminated. Steve felt his stomach twist when he found Kelton's line. Kelton. David. Pending. What did pending even mean? He scrolled further and suddenly froze. There, halfway down the list, was a name he never expected. Rowell Michael. Terminated. Kelton's assistant. The man he had tried to contact earlier that day. The man who was supposedly unavailable. Steve whispered, "They're killing them, one by one." But the file had more, far more. At the bottom was a second folder. Room maps. He opened it. Dozens of schematics filled the screen. They looked like blueprints, but not of buildings. These were layouts of underground spaces. Windowless, no exits, no camera angles marked, only blind corridors, sealed doors, and central chambers labeled Room 1, Room 2, Room 3, Room 12. Every room had notes. Soundproof. No external connection. Isolated climate. Observation allowed only from Tier 3 access. Steve leaned back, horrified. These weren't meeting rooms. They were holding rooms. Places where people disappeared. Places where decisions were forced. Places where names changed status. He clicked one more file. A text document titled Protocol Entry. It read, "No individual may enter without authorization from Tier 4 directive. Subjects are to be processed sequentially. No recording devices allowed. Compliance is mandatory. Non-compliance results in removal from room network and reclassification." Reclassification. That word chilled him more than any threat. At 2:23 a.m., as Steve continued scrolling through the files, his laptop froze. The cursor stopped. The screen flickered. Then a black window opened. "You should not be viewing this." Steve's pulse spiked. Another line appeared. "Step away from the computer." He slammed the laptop shut. His apartment fell silent. Too silent. He held his breath, listening. Nothing. Finally, he exhaled and grabbed his phone. Edgar answered on the second ring. "Man, it's 2 a.m. We're compromised," Steve cut him off. "They accessed my laptop. They know I have the files." Edgar paused. "What do they do now?" "I don't know," Steve said, "but we can't stay still." At 3:01 a.m., the hallway outside Steve's apartment creaked. Steve froze. Another sound. A soft click. Metal against metal. Someone was tampering with the lock. He turned off the lights, moved silently into the kitchen, grabbed the only thing that could serve as a weapon, a heavy metal tripod. The lock clicked again. Then slowly, Very slowly. The door opened. A silhouette stepped inside. Tall, still, waiting. Steve raised the tripod, but the figure spoke first. "Don't!" a voice whispered. "I'm here to help." Steve didn't lower the tripod. "Who are you?" The figure stepped into the dim light. A woman, mid-30s, sharp eyes, wearing dark civilian clothes, but her posture betrayed training, a professional, possibly military. "My name doesn't matter," she said, "but I work with the man who met you at the parking lot." Steve's grip tightened. "What do you want?" She closed the door quietly. "To get you out before they arrive." "Who's coming?" She looked at him with an expression that told him everything he needed to know. "The people who changed statuses from pending to terminated." Steve grabbed the flash drive. "You're taking me to Kelton?" The woman shook her head. "No, Kelton is no longer accessible. But there is someone else, someone higher, who can explain everything." She motioned toward the back window. "We leave through there. The front entrance is compromised." Steve hesitated. "Why save me?" "Because," she said, "you're about to expose something we've been trying to expose for years, and because once they decide to erase you, you don't get a second chance." A thud sounded at the front door, a firm, heavy strike, then another. "They're early," she whispered. "Move." Steve climbed out the window onto the emergency fire escape. Wind whipped his face. The woman followed him. Below, a black van was already pulling into the parking lot. Not the same one from Kelton's disappearance, a different one, but serving the same purpose. The woman grabbed Steve's arm. "No matter what happens," she said, "you run, and you don't stop." The door behind them burst open. Shouts, footsteps. Steve didn't look back. He ran, down the stairs, across the alley, into the darkness of the city. And behind him, echoing through the cold night, he heard the woman yell, "Go!" Steve didn't stop running until his lungs burned and his legs threatened to give out. He stumbled into a narrow side street, lit only by the flicker of a failing street lamp. Behind him the sounds faded. Shouts, footsteps, the metallic slam of a van door. He pressed his back against a cold brick wall, gasping for breath. The woman had stayed behind. Why? Her last words echoed in his head. "No matter what happens, you run." He didn't know her name, but he knew she had just saved his life, and somewhere behind him, she might be fighting for her own. Steve forced himself onto his feet and pulled out his phone. No service. For a moment he considered smashing it, but then it vibrated. The screen turned black. A single message appeared. "Keep moving." Another vibration. A second message. "You're not safe yet." The sender was unknown. No number. Just a blank field. Steve whispered, "Who are you?" A third message came in. "The woman who helped you is still alive." His breath caught. "Can you get her out?" No reply. Instead, he received coordinates. A location. 23 minutes from where he stood. "Come alone." Steve left the alley and followed the silent path toward the coordinates. He crossed under empty bridges, walked past abandoned warehouses and rail yards where time had stopped decades ago. Every now and then he glanced over his shoulder. Every shadow felt alive. Every distant engine sounded like the black van. After 12 minutes, he reached the outer industrial zone, a place where no cabs came, no lights worked, and no pedestrians wandered after dark. Finally, he stopped in front of a rusted gate. The coordinates pointed inside. He pushed the gate open. It groaned loudly, echoing across the empty yard. Ahead of him stood an old factory building, windows smashed, metal siding peeling away. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. And yet, a faint light glowed inside. Steve stepped through the broken entrance. Dust floated in the air like ash. The light came from the far end of the factory floor, a single bulb hanging from a cord, illuminating a small table. At the table sat a man. His posture was straight. His clothes were simple but too clean for the environment. His face was calm, confident, but his eyes were worn. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit, Steve." The journalist froze. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "My name is Jonathan Hale." The name meant nothing to Steve, but the man noticed his confusion and added, "I am the person Kelton was trying to expose, and the person who tried to stop him." Steve blinked. "You? You were behind the disappearance?" Hale shook his head. "No, I was behind the reason for it, not the method." He leaned forward. You need context, and I'm the only one willing to give it to you. Steve approached slowly and sat down. Hale's voice softened. First, the woman who helped you. Her name is Lyra. She survived, for now. Steve exhaled, relieved. But she will not survive long. Hale continued, unless you understand what you've stepped into. Hale folded his hands. You saw the files. You saw the names. The statuses. Steve nodded. What are the rooms? Who runs them? Hale looked up at the ceiling, exhaling through his nose. The rooms were created to protect democracy from destabilizing actors. At least that's how it started. He spoke with the tone of someone reciting a confession. Politicians who threatened national stability, billionaires who played games with economies, tech leaders who built things they could not control. We brought them in. We showed them the consequences of their actions. We redirected them. Steve's jaw tightened. And if they didn't comply? Hale didn't blink. They were removed. Steve stared at him. You're describing a shadow government. No, Hale said sharply. I'm describing a cleanup operation that grew out of control. He leaned closer. Something changed in the past 2 years. A new directive took over. More aggressive. Less accountable. Steve swallowed. What directive? Hale's expression darkened. One that labeled Kelton a threat. One that labeled me a threat. One that is now labeling you a threat. Hale placed a small device on the table, a jammer. It hummed, faintly. Everything you've done since the press conference has been monitored. They've been tracking your movement, your searches, even your pulse. Steve's heart pounded harder. That's impossible. They use biometric capture from street cameras, Hale said calmly. Your face was flagged the moment you reacted to Kelton's statement. Steve leaned back, horrified. So, what do you want from me? Hale's voice dropped. To survive. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside were documents. Old, yellowed, stamped with seals Steve didn't recognize. Photos of men in suits, signed directives, organizational maps, proof. They will kill me, Hale said. Soon. Maybe tonight. But you can still walk away. If, and only if, you release the truth in the right order. Steve frowned. What do you mean? Hale pointed at the envelope. You must not release everything at once. If you do, they will burn the city to find you. But if you reveal it, piece by piece, people will start asking questions. Pressure will build, and the rooms will crumble. Steve felt a weight settle on his shoulders. And if I refuse? Hale looked him dead in the eyes. Then your name becomes another status in their system. A long silence filled the room. Finally, Hale whispered, You have no idea how deep this goes. Suddenly, a loud rumble echoed through the factory. Hale's eyes snapped toward the entrance. They're here? Steve froze. Who? Hale stood. Tier 4 retrieval unit. A shadow passed the broken windows, then another. Flashlights. Boots. Hale grabbed Steve's arm. Run! Run now! Steve didn't move. What about you? Hale gave him a sad, almost peaceful smile. My status is already set. Footsteps echoed closer. Go! Steve turned and sprinted toward the back exit as shouts filled the factory floor. Behind him he heard Hale's voice, calm, resolute. I confess, I'm the one you want. Then a crash, a struggle. And the last thing Steve heard before he slipped into the night was, the truth will come out. Steve leaned back in his chair, trying to quiet the growing tension in his chest. Why would a politician admit something like this? Why now? And why to him on live television? The more he replayed the moment in his mind, the more unsettling it became. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't an emotional breakdown. It was calculated, spoken with intention, delivered at the exact moment when a nationwide audience was most attentive. As the studio remained frozen in silence, Steve finally found the strength to lean toward the control room glass. His voice trembled slightly. Tell me we're not the only broadcast this went out on, he said. A producer, still pale, shook his head. It aired everywhere. Synchronized. Networks. Streams. Radio. Every outlet that shared the feed. Steve exhaled slowly. So the entire country heard it. And beyond that, another producer added, it's already spreading online. People are slicing the clip, analyzing it frame by frame. There are thousands of posts, some saying it's a hoax, others claiming it's a warning. Steve rubbed his forehead. Or a confession, he murmured. A confession to something we still don't fully understand. There was a heavy pause. The room seemed to shrink around him. He turned back to his desk, gripping its edge. The cameras were off, the stage lights dimmed, but he still felt the pressure of millions of unseen eyes. For a moment, the silence was almost suffocating. Then his phone vibrated. Normally, Steve ignored calls during production, but something about the name flashing across the screen made his stomach twist. It was Denton Briggs, a well-connected investigative journalist who rarely contacted Steve without reason, and never during a crisis. Steve answered. "Denton? What's going on?" The voice on the other end sounded strained, like someone speaking while constantly checking over their shoulder. "Steve, listen carefully. What he said, it wasn't spontaneous. We've been tracking hints of this for months. Something's been moving behind the scenes, something big, and this announcement was the first public crack in the wall." Steve felt his pulse quicken. "What do you mean? What are you not telling me?" "I can't say everything over the phone, but you need to understand this wasn't meant to be a clean confession. It was a trigger." "Trigger for what?" "For people in very specific positions. People who will know exactly what to do next." Steve lowered his voice. "You're telling me this was a signal?" "Yes," Denton whispered. "And if the signal has been given, we don't have much time." The call abruptly ended. Steve stared at the screen, his thoughts spinning. A signal, a network of people waiting for a phrase hidden in a public statement. It sounded like a conspiracy theory, except Denton Briggs didn't deal in theories. He dealt in evidence, hard, verifiable facts. He stood, paced the studio floor, then turned to the team. "We have to prepare for follow-ups. People will demand clarity. They'll want interviews, explanations." But before he could finish, a young assistant rushed in from the hallway, breathless. "Steve, you need to see this." "What now?" "It's the senator's office. They just released an official statement." Steve clenched his jaw. "Play it." A screen flickered on. The statement was short, only a few lines. "Earlier today, Senator Harrington made remarks that are being misinterpreted. He was speaking metaphorically, addressing systemic issues and institutional corruption. Any suggestion otherwise is baseless. Further statements will be provided soon." The producers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Steve laughed dryly. "Metaphorical. He practically detonated a political bomb on live television, and they're calling it a metaphor?" "More than that," a producer added quietly. "Just check the timestamps." Steve frowned. "Timestamps?" "Yes. The statement was drafted before his interview began." A chill ran down his spine. "It was pre-written?" "Exactly. It was prepared hours earlier." Steve inhaled sharply. That meant only one thing. The senator had planned everything, and worse, his office had been prepared to spin it instantly. Steve felt a cold realization settle into him. "What are we dealing with?" he whispered. Before anyone could attempt an answer, one of the studio monitors changed unexpectedly. The emergency broadcast indicator flashed silently. No sound, just a pulsating icon. Everyone stopped. Steve slowly approached the screen. Then the words appeared, "Stand by for immediate government communication." The room fell into absolute stillness. Steve's breath caught in his throat. Whatever was happening, it had only just begun.